Welcome to week 7 here at Mpai 600 here at Georgetown University's Applied Intelligence program. Welcome to almost the end of the course for you guys, and again, we're going to start wrapping this up and making sure that you get time to do your last assignments in this program, or this course, I should say. So, announcements, again, just our last couple of days here. 6 May is the last day of the course. It's also the last day to hand in the final paper, and your final will be due 6 May as well. Based on some of the questions that I've gotten and some issues with timing, I've gone ahead and released the final out there. So it is out there now. There's actually 2 questions, and I apologize. The syllabus, there's 3, but I narrowed it down to 2 to make it a little bit more digestible. So if there's questions on the final, you can see it now. Please let me know this week, and we can take care of from it. I just want to emphasize again, the final is an individual assignment. It is not meant for you to collaborate, cooperate, or anything like that. And it is meant, again, to be an individual exam. Open book, open note, but again, don't collaborate with your fellow students. So that's due 6 May. We're going to have the Zoom session 3 May. Again, if you're in group 4 or 5, you will be briefing at the Zoom session. You will not be doing the final paper. Your presentation will be the final assignment. And we're going to do that at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, if there's issues with timing, people on the other side of the world, those types of issues, let me know, and I can make an exception if that is the case. And then finally, course evaluations. Please do them. I want to make sure I can tailor this course and maybe possibly future courses to my audience here and take it from there. I just want to back up. One thing I do want to mention, in the Zoom session, I will have a job talk as well. So not just group 4 and 5 will be briefing, but everyone can sit in. And after they brief, we'll talk jobs in the federal government, jobs in the national security field, jobs in the intelligence community, and what I know. And if you can bring something out, if anyone has experience interviewing or working in a large company or hiring, please feel free to share that as well. I don't have a monopoly on this, so I want to get as many different perspectives from that aspect as well. So, current events, DNC hack and risk management. DNC is the Democratic National Committee. If you've been following current events, the DNC sued Russia, the Trump administration, for the hack that occurred prior to the 2016 election. I don't want to talk about politics here. I don't want to talk about Trump collusion, and I certainly don't want to talk about some of the other stuff that have come out in the Mueller investigation and various dossiers and those types of issues. In fact, I think the true nature of the hack has been lost amongst the salacious details about in the dossier and questions of collusion. What happened, for those of you who don't remember, is the Russians hacked into the Democratic National Committee and selectively leaked emails to WikiLeaks, so that it painted Hillary Clinton and the Democrats in general negatively. That's pretty much fact at this point, or at least the one truth that we can all pretty much agree on. And the question is, just like we talked about Intel and Intel driving policy, should the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, have been aware that the Russians were trying to do it, and were the countermeasures to prevent this realistic? We've talked about earlier is Intel drives a decision which allows for countermeasures that can reduce risk, and I do believe the DNC hack, and this is one of the questions on your final, is a perfect example of this. I've been told from several cybersecurity experts that the DNC hack, the email hack, whether it's DNC or John Podesta's emails, could have been prevented by simple two-factor authentication on DNC emails. A lot of you probably have two-factor authentication for getting onto your bank or getting on your credit cards. And it's very simple. You log in and password, and then usually you get either a text message with another password or sometimes they require a biometric or some other way so that if your password's compromised, your accounts aren't. And I'm told that if they had done this, the emails that were so pernicious up to in 2016 would not have been released. So the question is, should the DNC have been aware that this was a problem, and were the risk countermeasures, the mitigation factors, reasonable enough that could have prevented this disaster? And I argue yes. I argue the DNC should have been aware that a foreign actor would want to have penetrated their servers. The Chinese have been doing it for 20 years. The Russians have been doing it for 10 years. Other foreign actors would love to get into American political parties just for intelligence gathering purposes. So you did have, I believe, again, this is my analysis on it, and you can feel free to disagree, that the DNC should have been aware of the foreign threat. In addition, the countermeasures to prevent it, two-factor authentication, were reasonable. A lot of you might think it's inconvenient to do two-factor authentication, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not that hard. Especially if you're in a very sensitive position like you are in the DNC. So again, you had the threat, you had the reasonable countermeasures, and you had the massive consequences that I do believe the DNC should have been aware that their sensitive information, if it had gotten out, would have been catastrophic. The DNC hack, I think, is an excellent example of kind of the themes we've been talking about in this course. And again, it shows it's not just big military issues like Pearl Harbor or Yom Kippur War, but this could be a political organization, a private company, small town law enforcement that is vulnerable to these types of issues, and reasonable risk mitigations can be undertaken. And that's what intelligence is supposed to do. It's supposed to drive certain policy, changes in policy or risk mitigation countermeasures to prevent catastrophic loss or catastrophic disaster. So I highly encourage you to read the documentary or watch the documentary Putin's Revenge, which I've included in the final a link to. There's other articles out there about the DNC hack that are worthy of looking at it if you choose to answer the question on the final. So paper 2, everyone's got their paper back for paper 2. Just some quick issues. Passive voice. We still have issues with passive voice. I'm sorry. Too much background. I apologize for the animation build-up there. Too many of your papers had a little bit too much background. Get to the point, especially in a 1,200 to 1,500 page paper or word paper. I don't need to know about what happened at Fort Hood. I don't need a description of the battleships on Battleship Row at Pearl Harbor. That's all known. Be brutal about weeding out words and sentences in your papers, especially something so short as 1,200 words. Every sentence, every word, every paragraph should earn its way onto your paper, and it should always reinforce whatever point you're trying to make. That's probably the overall background or overall issue that I had with many of your papers. Passive voice. I don't mean to get into your 9th grade grammar teacher's head here, but the boy kicked the ball is active voice. Subject, verb, direct object. The ball was kicked by the boy is passive voice. When you have the direct object, the subject, and then the verb in the middle. That's a lot of you probably been lectured on passive voice. That's what passive voice is. It's when the direct object of the verb or the direct object of the sentence starts out the sentence. In order to avoid this, I do this in my writing, and I know this is nitpicky, but I go through my sentences, and just like in 9th grade, I label subject, verb, direct object, indirect object. And then I try and make sure that the subject and verb are the first two parts of the sentence. Yes, that is nitpicky, but again, when you're writing short, concise papers, 2 pages that you want to get up to the chain of command, you do want to be that picky. You do want to ask, is this preposition extraneous? Is this modifier dangling? Is this direct object starting off a sentence? That's a important point of writing as you advance and as your career takes you. So again, passive voice was another issue. No laundry lists. I did mention a lot of things that could be intelligence failures. What I wanted you to do was drive home what you thought was the key factor. Yom Kippur War was one a lot of people did, and for some reason, for just this paper, a lot of people talked about the politicization of intelligence related to the Yom Kippur War. That's all fine, but you have to focus on politicization, and then you can say that was the driving factor in the intelligence failure related to the Yom Kippur, the interface between the intel analysts and the policymakers. Don't go give me 15 reasons why the Yom Kippur War was an intelligence failure. I want what you think is the overriding factor. And then be specific as possible in your intelligence failures. If you think Pearl Harbor was an intelligence failure because of the inability of the federal government to coordinate with the intel in Hawaii, then you have to be specific. What did the federal government collect and fail to disseminate down to the military leaders in Pearl Harbor, and would that have made a difference in averting the Pearl Harbor disaster? Be, again, as specific as possible when you're talking about, let's say, 9/11, the failures to communicate among the FBI and the NSA and specific data that wasn't informed from the NSA down, or wasn't communicated from the NSA down to the FBI or local law enforcement. Again, you got to be as specific as possible, because again, you're telling somebody, whether if you're doing the Fort Hood shooting, that it's their fault. They screwed up, and people are dead because they screwed up. And if you're going to point the finger at somebody, you got to have very specific evidence that says that you failed to communicate. You failed to provide this piece of information. So again, try and be as specific as possible when you're assigning. You could say assigning blame, assessing failure, however you want to say it. So those are the issues with paper 2. You have the grades back, and if there's any questions or issues, please let me know. Okay, so reviewing this past week, I want to talk about this. This is actually from week 5, but it's come up as I'm speaking now. There's a shooting in Nashville. I don't know what the causes of it, but there's a lot of issues with when you have these incidents, whether it's a mass shooting or a terrorist attack. There's that gap between what doing someone that could be arrested and having an indicator that they might be linked to terrorism. A lot of people, again, Nidal Hasan is a key point. You couldn't have arrested Nidal Hasan. He didn't commit a crime until he started to shoot up that Fort Hood station. That guy in Florida, in the Parkland shooting, even though it wasn't terrorism, people say there's a lot of indicators that say he had mental issues and he was violent. That's all true, but there wasn't enough to arrest him permanently. So how do we solve, and that's a huge issue with lone wolves or these, again, one-off shooters, mass shooters, where, yeah, in hindsight we say we should have known that he was engaged in this activity, but he didn't cross the threshold to what is arrestable. And if you're going to do your final on that, or talk about that in your final paper, give me some answers. Give me a recommendation to how to mitigate that. Or at least say, in a free society, there's nothing we can do about it. We just have to accept that level of risk. And if you're going to say that, you should have your ducks in a row on that question, because you're going to probably piss off a lot of people. I always thought, again, access to equipment by known individuals. And what I mean that again, it's just another way of saying, how do we limit guns from getting in the hands of terrorists or people with mental health issues? That is, again, I'm going to give you my opinion, regardless of where you come on the gun debate. That is probably the best way to mitigate lone wolf shootings, as well as these mass mental health shooting issues. Now, there's a lot of questions that come up on this. Is okay, when does someone's mental health get to the point where you can revoke their privilege to purchase a weapon? When does someone's connection to a terrorist group get to a point where you can prevent them from, or you put them on a list to prevent them from accessing a gun? That is the key question to ask. Just as another point of investigative questions, so let's talk about this gun control issue for a second. There's two ways to look about this. So if you've seen on the news, we want to make sure that the no-fly list is cross-checked against gun purchases. That means if you're on the no-fly list, you can't purchase an AR-15 or a semi-automatic weapon. That sounds reasonable, and that's probably a good idea. What would really be helpful to law enforcement is if you flip that on its head and you said, when someone pops hot on the no-fly list, we can backtrack that they have purchased 10 AR-15s in the last year. That would be very helpful to law enforcement, to counterterrorism, to know that people are trying to stop lone wolves as an indicator of nefarious activity. The problem is you would need a gun registry, a national gun registry to do that. Because you would need to know every time you bought a gun, it got indicated that Sharma bought a gun here, and he got a gun here, and he bought a gun here. And then the fact that I bought 10 AR-15s would be put on a gun registration. Don't think that the NRA or any other gun rights group would allow that in our political environment. But I'll let you decide on whether that's a good idea and whether that would actually be politically feasible. CompStat. I think everyone here said that CompStat was the reason for the reduction in violence that we saw in the 80s and 90s. What CompStat is, again, it's not a computer program, but it focused on accountability among law enforcement and police authorities. But as you saw in one of the articles, it also gave incentives to alter reports or to act in ways that made your numbers look good when in fact you weren't solving criminal activities. The incentives kind of skewed behavior. So there was a lot of positive talks for CompStat. I think everyone said that. Maybe I didn't go through the negatives in detail there, but there are negatives for CompStat. And then I would just ask, there are other factors for the decline in crime seen through the 80s and 90s. You had a booming economy, which tends to lead to declines in crime. You had, and this is very controversial, but you had an increased number of people being arrested. We could talk about mass incarceration and the evils of mass incarceration, and I believe that there is evils in mass incarcerations, but there will be a decline in crime if you arrest a lot of people. That's whether that's right or wrong, is another issue, but that does come up as a reason for the decline in crime. The Freakonomics, for those of you who read the book, argue that abortion, the legalization of abortion, is the reason why you had a decline in crime. That people who would be committing crimes in the 80s and 90s were aborted in the 70s. Another very, very controversial factor, and I'm not going to get into detail on that, but that was a theory posted out in the book Freakonomics. The larger point I'm trying to make is you have to analyze the variables for what led to decline in criminal activity and determine what is the key variable that led to that decline. And then I like that Boston Marathon documentary that I had you see, because you're going to go into this in a different class, but CCTV forensics. It's discussed as a post-incident tool in that documentary that I sent, but a lot have proponents of CCTV particularly believe that it could be a preventative tool. It could be used to stop crime and as a criminal intelligence analysis tool. London has spent many hundreds of millions of dollars on CCTV. New York has spent lots of money on CCTV. And I want you to ask the question, is the money worth spent, and is it a preventative tool for criminal or counterterrorism activity? And that's something, again, to just keep in the back of your head as we go forward. So preview for week 7. We are shifting gears here. I think there's maybe only 1 or 2 people who are in the business intelligence track for this course. But I do think the Dr. Gilad lecture that I have you and just the business intelligence case studies that I give are actually, it will get your mind thinking in different ways. So you might not be in the business community, but I think it'll definitely make you think in different ways that would help you if you're in law enforcement or in the larger intel community. So I think it's good that everyone gets some exposure to it. You have the Dr. Gilad interview, who is one of the founders of business intelligence as a field of study. And the question I want to ask is, businesses that operate in the same space, what are the variables that make one succeed while the others fail? Not too many of you probably shop at Circuit City right now, but there are plenty of Best Buys out there. Why? Why was Best Buy successful and Circuit City doomed to the ash heap of history? There's a lot of questions. Amazon has put a lot of businesses out of business. A lot of brick and mortar stores like JCPenney and now Toys R Us. But Target is still around and thriving. Walmart is still around and thriving. Why? Why have certain brick and mortar stores been able to survive the online, what's happened online, and while others, again, are in the dustbin of history? CVS, if you're in the DC area, CVS dominates. Walgreens, CVS has beaten Walgreens and Rite Aid. It dominates. Why? Why is CVS, which sells the same products, same supply chains, essentially beat its competitors? What are the variables that led to success and failure? And think through that as you're going through this week's readings. And then again, think of applications to national security issues, social media. I've got an article about social media and business intelligence. Think about that as you're going forward in the how to use social media in law enforcement, or social media exploitation, law enforcement in the greater intel community role. So that's what I have for week 7. As always, if there's any issues or problems, let me know. And please acknowledge that you have seen this video.